With update 2.7, Wuthering Waves concludes the rover's journey in Rinascita. It's been a long journey, and a long time since I've reflected on one, so why not do it here? This video includes my overall thoughts on the main quest and the character usage and writing within, companion quests, exploration quests, environments, side events, and technical achievements and issues that came as part of the Rinascita region. That includes Raguna, the Avenolium, the Fabricatorium, Septimont, and the Sanguis Plateau. Note that there will be links to some of my previous videos depending on when they may become relevant, so watch for the top right corner if you wish to see them. Although the setting of Rinascita cannot be further from the setting of the previous regions, I have to say that the story that was written for it stands very well on its own. The writers made good use of the fantasy theme and delivered a story that, while not perfect, works well enough. Towards the end of the arc, the writers have included more sci-fi elements like the central hub and civilization capsule, which could be interpreted as an attempt to join the two styles together. Similarly, many of the threads come together in the end, providing a satisfying conclusion. I'm not a fan of the episodic nature of this game's story because not only am I more used to a single overarching story in video games, but also, each chapter is basically separate from the others, on top of the overarching plot being a secondary consideration. But if I were to consider each chapter individually and put aside any romantic tendencies, I would say that most of the stories were written quite well. If I had to place each chapter on a graph that measures writing quality and emotional weight, the main quests would look like this. You've probably noticed that the main quests that I've rated the best are 2.0 and 2.7, the start and end point respectively. 2.0's main quest is still my favorite because, as stated in my 2.0 video, it makes use of the entire region and all its bosses, along with introducing the player to the region as well as new ideas using characters that frequently interact with each other. At the time, there were 5 characters that were featured in the marketing: Carlotta, Brandt, Rocha, Phoebe, and Zani. All of them were used at different points in the story depending on the ideas they introduced and the bosses that were relevant to them. At the end, they all came back to Raguna City for the final act, giving the quest a satisfying ending. The reason I put 2.7 in second place is because of 2 reasons. 1. This quest includes older characters and has frequent character interactions. And 2. Unlike most of the chapters in 2.x, it does not spend too much time on one character. As the endpoint of the Rinascita arc, the writers must consider everything that happened beforehand, and the writing is constrained by those limitations. Just like in the final chapters of 1.0 and 2.0, all the characters are brought together in 2.7. This is to be expected, and it is fine most of the time. However, some characters like Augusta were made weaker than they should be to serve the story's message that no one person can do anything on their own. Having characters interact frequently in this act is to be expected, but it seems odd because almost every main quest between 2.0 and 2.7 only featured 1 or 2 characters and excluded all others, so most of these characters barely even interacted with each other, and somehow they work together just fine when they meet in the final chapter. Some of them haven't even been seen together in the main story, so it looks even stranger. Despite these flaws, 2.7's main quest is still good overall, and brings the Rinascita arc to a satisfying and powerful end. I want to dedicate a section of this video into discussing the characters in 2.x. I've already stated my issues with character writing in this video, so I'll not repeat that here. Unfortunately, the Gathering Wives nonsense has continued all the way to 2.6, which is not a good thing. Another trend that I'm not a fan of is the writer's tendency to throw away older characters, even the ones that were introduced in the same region. A few good examples are Phoebe not appearing in 2.5 and Lupa not appearing in 2.6, despite it being obvious to most players that they should have had a role to play in these stories. Because of this trend, many of the characters of Wuthering Waves all seem to live in their own bubble, where they are only relevant in the quest that introduces them and little else. This also leaves some with not enough development or screen time, making the story less believable. There were also a few missed opportunities, such as Phoebe going on a quest as she questions her beliefs, or resolving the feud between the Montellis and Physalis. Phoebe barely changes until 2.7, so there's nothing there, and since players don't really get to see Carlotta and Cantarella meet and reconcile after 2.2's main quest, their decision to work together in 2.7 comes out of nowhere. Additionally, it is weird that the rover went to Rinascita because of Abby. And if I remember correctly, 2.7 is the first time since the game's launch that players were given any clues into what Abby is. I think it could have been done a bit sooner because I actually forgot about the whole thing till the end. Cartethia stands out as one of the better characters, appearing all throughout 2.x. Even though 2.2's writing could have been made much stronger if she wasn't revived after sacrificing herself, her usage in the main quest since then was one of the things that the writers did well. Aside from the rover, she is the most important character in all of 2.x, and I don't think anyone else could have been more suitable for such a role. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Galbrina, whose writing suffers because of her role. Although she was introduced in 2.6, she was merely a vessel for Augusta's backstory, so her development mainly takes place in 2.7. As a result, she has fewer opportunities to interact with the other characters and connect with players before the grand finale, forcing the developers to kind of rush her backstory so that the main quest wouldn't drag on. She is also extremely powerful and possesses a ton of information about TDs that no one else knows, which runs the risk of her being seen as a perfect character that conveniently shows up at the end of a story to save the day and provide crucial information to push the story forward. Her role does not invalidate her characterization, but it does make her less compelling. Tyrian's sudden introduction is even more jarring than Galbrina's because he barely plays a role in the main story, only showing up to fight Scar and give the rover an important item. Speaking of Scar, he was imprisoned by Jinxie halfway through 1.0's main quest, escaping off-screen in 2.4 without any explanation till 2.7. The hunt for Scar distracts from the main quest and should have been its own companion quest with the boss fight at the end. This would have given Tyrian much needed depth as well as a more prominent role. Speaking of the Fraxidus villains, Frolova's back, somehow. I know that she's not truly dead, but reviving her as if nothing had happened completely invalidates the emotional weight of the ending of 2.5's main quest. It heavily reminds me of Cortana, who died in Halo 4 and was brought back in the very next game to play the villain, and everyone hated that. It also does not help that Frolova's revival was also vaguely explained in the same manner as Scar's escape from prison, in a separate scene after the main quest. Since players don't get to see her revival, her appearance in 2.7 can come as a shock. Cristoforo is another tough nut. I've always liked his mannerisms and the way he emotes and carries himself, not to mention his visual design and voice. However, I must admit that he is not written very well. Every single time his carefully laid plans are thwarted, he acts calmly as if it's all part of the plan anyway. He doesn't, for example, get angry at the rover or their companions, or at the failures of his allies after each defeat. As a result, Cristoforo can reasonably be interpreted as the writer's self-insert villain that is always a step ahead of the protagonist, but without any real flaws or compelling character development. I have nothing else to say on character writing, aside from what I've already said before and whatever I've forgotten to include, so let's move on. The companion quests in 2.x are hit or miss, even though they serve their purpose just fine. It is worth noting that some of these quests are just meant to be adventures and not all of them need emotional or dark moments. Bringing up the graph from earlier, here's how I grade the companion quests. I put Cantarella and Chacona's quests higher than all the others for one reason. They have a lot of emotional weight. Both explore their past and touch on dark subjects that gave the world more depth. Zani's quest scores lower because even though the themes are different from Yinlin's quest, the premise is the same. Brand and Rocha's quests score even lower as they don't grant more insight into the respective characters, since it was already covered in 2.0's main quest. However, it is worth noting that they are not bad quests, just way less memorable. It should also be obvious that the main quests belonging to 2.2 with Cartethia, 2.5 with Frolova, and the second half of 2.6 with Yuno should have been companion quests instead, since they fit the criteria perfectly. However, since they have some semblance of continuity, they had to be classified as main quests, putting them in a rather weird spot. Of course, after touching on the main quests and companion quests, I have to rank exploration quests as well. Bringing up the chart again, here are my thoughts on them. The quests featuring Frolova, Lenore, and the Exiles are the best because, just like my pick for the best companion quest, they utilize characters that give the quest more emotional weight on top of featuring the environment. It is worth noting that most of these quests change the environment in some way. And although my favorite environmental change is the giant banyan in 1.0, I have to give special mention to the one tied to the quest featuring the magical dragons. It is no surprise that I love the open world of Wuthering Waves. As I said before, the Rinascita aesthetic is so different from everything that came before that it looks like it belongs in a different game. However, the art team did extremely well when it comes to designing and presenting the fantasy landscape, complete with exaggerated architecture, extreme verticality, and scale that does not fail to impress. In fact, I love the environment and the accompanying music so much that I continue to make videos showcasing them, repeating the template I had for the Black Shores video. In terms of gameplay, the playable space of 2.0's Raguna alone is as large as 1.0's Huanglong, and the regions that came after only added to that scale. The activities that accompany them have also changed. Among the things that I enjoyed were the painting puzzles and high-level enemies that were scattered around the map. On the other hand, the flight challenges require no input to complete, some of the puzzles were too easy, and the echo farming was made far worse thanks to nightmare nests introduced in 2.5 that could only be farmed once a day, as opposed to tacit fields that players can choose to farm more via wave plates. There is also more space in between activities, leading to players complaining about large unused sections of playable space, which I didn't notice or consider until recently. As I said in my exploration video, general exploration, puzzles, and open world activities in 1.x are better because the puzzles actually require brain power, activities are more varied, there are more secret enemies like blobflies, and most of the treasure chests and challenges are not shown on the map, requiring players to find them on their own. Additionally, it took more time to finish that content, allowing the developers more time to develop a new area while players busied themselves with the activities. In contrast, Rinascita can feel less rewarding as more content is completed over a shorter period, making it seem like the region has less content even when it may not be true. It is also worth noting that the flight tool only facilitates such activities and thus should not be attributed to the exploration in Rinascita being worse. Likewise, the ability for players to fly in Huanglong and Mount Firmament also does not make the exploration in 1.x any worse. There are a lot of things that Kuro games can improve in 3.x, and the open world experience is definitely one of them. The developers introduced a ton of events with 2.x, the quality and difficulty of which ranges. I'll go through the ones that I enjoyed, the ones that I disliked, and some that I think should return to the game. I'll begin with what I enjoyed. 2.0's Tales of the Isles is a rather charming sightseeing event that has players interact with landmarks and items. The Peaks of Prestige event from 2.4 is a fun card game, though the difficulty spikes at the end, making the final contenders very difficult. The Anniversary's Cube, Cubic, and Cubie is perfect for the occasion and stands out as the best piece of content from that update. 2.7's Tidal Defense Simulator is a somewhat interesting tower defense mode that features unique assets as far as I'm aware. Finally, 2.7's Lament Recon mimics Vampire Survivors with its top-down perspective and progression. All of these are short and fun on their own and may spark interest among players in other genres. Of course, all of them have time-limited rewards, though it is worth noting that Tales of the Isles and the Cube event are permanent, allowing players to revisit these memorable moments at any time. Now let's move on to the events that I didn't like very much. 2.1 featured the Ritually Islands and came with a fishing event that provided something for players to do while 2.2 was in the works. However, it drags on for quite a long time on top of being repetitive, which can lead to fatigue. 2.3's Dreaming Deep is also way too long and repetitive, and multiple playthroughs are required to collect all the endings. I liked it at first, but I don't think I'll ever bring myself to finish it. In 2.4, the developers also added a much needed mob combat challenge called Wuthering Waves. Aside from sounding like a joke name that haters would call the game itself, this side mode turned out to be quite interesting for me when I first tried it out. Because of how buffs and items are implemented, it heavily incentivizes pulling for the latest character, just like recent versions of the Tower of Adversity. As a proponent of the idea that players shouldn't be coerced into gambling for characters they don't want, I do not like this game mode, if only because of what it represents. I commend the effort required to make all this content, and I do still think that giving players some content is still better than nothing, but I think they could have handled these much better. Finally, there are two events that I wish would return to the game. The first is Overdash Club, a parkour event that came with the game's release, teaching the player about the game's movement system and testing the player's knowledge and skill. If I remember correctly, it has not returned since 2.0, which is a shame because Rinascita could have also benefited from a similar thing. Wuthering Waves has a good movement system with its wall running and grappling hook, and it's a shame to see all of it being put aside for flight in 2.x. I think the return of Overdash Club for future regions could bring more attention to it on top of giving players an interesting challenge. The second is 1.0's Depths of Elusive Realm. It was a roguelike game mode that was replaced by other modes in 2.x. What I missed from Depths of Elusive Realm was being able to play characters in different ways, a notable example being DPS Budget. It also gave Echoes a much more important role and allows players to control bosses like the Crownless for short periods of time. I think out of all the side content, this is one of the most deserving to be converted into a permanent game mode. Now that I'm done talking about characters, environment, and side content, let's move on to the technical progress made in 2.x of Wuthering Waves. Regarding environment interactivity, this game always had it, but 2.x impressed me with the sheer number of changes, especially since it's a free-to-play mobile game. In my anniversary video, I praised Zani's quest for having tons of interactive objects in the environment, and little did I know more technical progress was about to come. 2.4's Septimond introduced even more object physics, such as the floating objects in Capitoline Hill's flooded district, as well as leaves all around the open world. 2.6 introduced physics tied to the bridge in Maroonwood, which surprised me since this wouldn't normally be implemented in a game meant to run on mobile devices. Of course, with more technical achievements came technical issues. It is inevitable that when implementing something new, bugs will surface, and I'm glad that the community and developers have been working together to find and fix these bugs. Personally, I have come across a few, and I even managed to softlock myself twice, once of which was because I tried to fly around during a main quest. When it comes to optimization though, I only had slight hiccups and freezes since 2.6 thanks to my beefy PC, but I've heard about players having issues since 2.x with the game being unplayable for some since 2.4. This is not acceptable, and I think special praise should be given to the developers that are working hard to fix them. Overall, the Rinascita region and all that came with it gave people plenty of reasons to pick up, return to, and analyze the game, along with generating a ton of revenue for Kuro Games. The studio took plenty of risks, and I have no doubt that making such a huge amount of content has a ton of challenges, and I'm quite glad that it didn't turn out worse. If anything, it brought more attention to the game, and that is always welcome. It also gave players a roughly equal number of reasons to like and dislike the game, and although I wish many things were done differently, I can't bring myself to say that I dislike Wuthering Waves, probably because I've always cared about gameplay more than anything. I mean, it should be obvious since I wouldn't be wasting time making videos on a game that I don't enjoy, but I'm saying it anyway because apparently I overestimated the intelligence of some people and I do not want to do so again. As always, I'm cautiously optimistic for whatever lies ahead, including 3.x. From here, I will be making less videos surrounding this game because I simply don't want to be tied to and known for creating content for one game. though I will still focus on action games for the majority of my content. That will be all for this video. Thanks for watching.